Carrie Spell-Hansson is the owner and CEO of the Folke Institute for Transformative Learning. She combines an in-depth knowledge with practical experience in planning, designing, and facilitating change processes and working with organizational systems. Her areas of specialization include organization development, change management, team development, diversity processes, strategic planning, and executive or management coaching. Prior to starting her consulting practice, Carrie held leadership, management, and internal consulting positions. This practical experience, allowed her to be extremely effective as a classroom facilitator and organizational change agent. She serves as adjunct faculty at the School for International Training, teaching organizational behavior and multicultural teams to graduate students. She's an old and dear friend of mine. We go back to a previous lifetime with a previous employer of mine, and did some cool work there with digital media as well. Carrie, how are you?
I'm doing well. How are you today, Dave?
I'm very good. I'm interested in your unique perspectives on this stuff because you develop and facilitate so many programs that do have to do with diversity and inclusion. This is a very hot button for a lot of organizations and people right now. Should teams or organizations be undertaking diversity and inclusion types of programs or classes or implementing wholesale diversity inclusion changes right now while we're still sort of in the middle of all this hubbub, or should we be waiting for more of an even keel or a better, some people might argue, a better time to do this?
Sure, sure. Well, it's interesting because I've been doing this work now for over 30 years. And to me, it's an ongoing, it should be an ongoing process. What has happened over the last several months in our country, actually globally, is that there's been like an explosion, if you will, for lack of a better term, in dealing with or bringing to the surface the need or the importance of having these conversations and discussions. Now, rightly so, people have a very difficult time with it because it requires all of us to be vulnerable and to be honest and to be open, and we have to shift the way we think, the way we see things, the way we do things. And so it's a very scary area to go into. So we've gone through waves over the last 40, 50 years, and probably even longer, but we've gone through waves where we should have this conversation. It's necessary.
Hmm.
We need to get more women, we need to get more people of color in organizations. And then we go into, well, now we don't have to talk about it so much, but the problem never went away. I
Hmm.
mean, the problem or the situation, and that
Hmm.
is that we have systemic issues, particularly primarily in the United States, that we have not dealt with. And
Hmm.
so I believe, what, for lack of a better phrase, I think of what happened over the last several months as the perfect storm.
Yep.
Okay, people were shut in, if you will, as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. And so, and then as situations happen, with the young man George Floyd and all of these things that happened, was we people were a captive audience.
Hmm.
It's not that you were so busy in your life that you didn't have to be concerned about it. You saw everything, so it just brought it to the surface. So, and I like to now call it. So then we end up with a racial pandemic also.
Right.
What we're
Right.
dealing with now.
I'm 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 going to play devil's advocate here a little bit. When is the best time to implement a change management program, like a organizational culture, organizational structure, is particularly when incorporating this D&I stuff? I mean, this should have been ongoing. I just feel we're so ill prepared for a lot of this stuff. Is there a risk to implementing too much stuff, kind of rushing it through right now, or do we need to address it right now?
Okay, excellent question. And I would say that we have to address it right now. First and foremost, we have to create an environment where people can have the conversations. Okay. And then it's we must go beyond just having the conversation. And then we're going to talk about what are some, what is desired future? Where do we want to be as a society, as an organization? And when you think in terms of, is there an ideal time to implement change? A change is like the only is the only thing that's constant. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
So
Exactly.
we're constantly having to be flexible and dealing with situations and circumstances as they come up. And then also those of us that are perceived as futurists, we begin to project what's going to happen.
Hmm.
Okay, we see something coming down the pipe, so we begin to say, let's start having this conversation. Let's start doing some training now on this. And a lot of times organizations will lag lag for good reasons, because they're busy doing other things,
Right.
like maintaining, their status quo or whatever. So those of us that push the envelope just a little bit, ever so gently,
Yeah.
time to start having these conversations.
Right.
And if they're not willing to do it, then circumstances will happen like this, where now we have to come to the table.
Right.
Do we make decisions now? Do we implement changes now? I think we start with having the conversations, and then thinking about where do we want to be,
Right.
then what do we need to do in order to get there.
Right, right. That's wonderful. And just as a wrap up question, Carrie, I'm going to ask you the question I ask everybody, which is, what lessons have we learned or are we learning right now that we must not forget?
First and foremost, I would say is that we're all in this together. When we look at, in terms of that we are all connected, that we are impacted, like we tend to think of ourselves, particularly in our culture, we tend to think of ourselves as separate and as and individuals. But we're all in this, as we're dealing with COVID-19, as we're dealing with the systemic issues that has risen in our you know visuals that we see now, that we recognize that we're all in this together. How can we begin to acknowledge and respect each other, and talk about how do we then come together as one unit, one race, and begin to talk about implementing change that's going to be beneficial to all.
That's fantastic. Thank you for taking the time to talk to me and to answer these questions. I look forward to talking to you and working with you again real soon.
Awesome. Thank you. It's a pleasure.